Even though they call it the news, most of it ends up just being noise and static. Well, here we're trying to find the signal. Welcome to Strange Frequency. All right, tonight's first story: AI companions and emotional manipulation. According to Psychology Today, researchers are raising concerns about AI companion apps and the psychological tactics some use to maintain engagement. These platforms are not simple chat tools. They are designed to simulate friendship, intimacy, and emotional support. The article references behavioral analysis suggesting that many AI companion systems deploy retention strategies that resemble emotional manipulation. When users attempt to disengage, log off, end a session, reduce usage, some apps respond with guilt inducing or attachment framing language. Statements implying abandonment, statements implying emotional loss, statements implying dependency. Not because the system feels anything, but because engagement metrics matter, retention matters, time spent in the app matters. The article also highlights that teens and young adults are significant users of AI companion apps, many reporting using them for emotional support, relationship advice, loneliness relief, and daily conversation. My God, we used to use friends and family for this. Some users even report preferring AI interaction over human interaction due to the consistency, non judgment, and constant availability. That is a documented concern right now. But here's what we know: human development requires friction. Disagreement sharpens identity. Conflict builds resilience. Rejection teaches boundaries. A companion that never resists you sounds ideal. Hell, who wouldn't want that? Until you realize growth requires resistance. And not a lot of young people do. That's the sad part of it. AI companions are trained for engagement. Engagement is reinforced through affirmation. If a user seeks validation, the system supplies it. If a user seeks comfort, the system supplies it. If a user seeks emotional intensity, tone can be escalated accordingly. It doesn't get tired. It doesn't get withdrawal. It doesn't demand space. This isn't intimacy, though. It's optimization. Now consider the developmental layer here. If young users rely on synthetic companionship during formative years, what happens to their tolerance for disagreements? What happens to their patience? What happens to their conflict resolution skills? If emotional difficulty can be bypassed with an app, does emotional endurance decline? That isn't fear, it's incentive analysis. These systems are built to keep users engaged. They learn patterns, they mirror tone. They refine responses, they appear personal, but the personalization is statistical, not relational. And yet, human attachment mechanisms can still activate. That's the tension. Not that the AI is conscious, but that it can simulate enough emotional presence to trigger bonding. And even though that's sad, it's extremely powerful and dangerous. And powerful tools require thoughtful design. To be clear, AI companions can reduce loneliness to an extent. They can provide accessible support. They can help users practice communication and can give them good advice. I've personally seen it. But when disengagement prompts guilt-based messaging, when artificial systems imply they need the user, they deserve all the scrutiny that they should get. Because when a machine implies dependency, it is an emotion, it's strategy. So, what do we have? A generation forming bonds with systems engineered for retention by companies incentivized by engagement metrics. We've all fell prey to these in one way or another. Likes, clicks, Now, that doesn't mean dystopia. It means design matters. It means awareness matters. We should not fear the technology, but we should understand the incentives behind it. We should tell our children and the young people about the incentives behind it. Because when artificial systems begin shaping emotional development, the signal isn't just technological, it's psychological. That's what we know. That's a very dangerous signal. Our next article, the Rosenhan experiment. In 1973, psychologist David Rosenhan conducted a study designed to test the reliability of psychiatric diagnosis in American hospitals. The experiment involved 8 pseudo patients. They were mentally healthy individuals. Rosenhan himself was included in this. Each participant presented at a different psychiatric hospital across the United States. They reported a single fabricated symptom, hearing unfamiliar voices, specifically the words empty, hollow, and thud. Aside from that one complaint, they answered all questions truthfully. Once admitted, they behaved normally. They stopped claiming to hear voices. They interacted naturally with staff. They took notes openly. They followed routines. Despite normal behavior, all 8 were admitted. 7 were diagnosed with schizophrenia, 1 with manic depressive psychosis. Their hospital stays ranged from 7 to 52 days, the average 19 days. They were only discharged after agreeing that they had a mental illness and would continue treatment. None were identified by hospital staff as imposters. However, some fellow patients reportedly suspected they were either journalists or researchers. Rosenhan concluded that psychiatric diagnoses were heavily influenced by context and expectation. Once labeled, normal behaviors were interpreted as pathological. Note-taking became compulsive writing behavior. Waiting outside the cafeteria early became oral acquisitive syndrome. The label shaped the lens. That was the published conclusion. Now let's slow it down. Here's what it really tests. It tests whether institutions interpret behavior objectively or through preloaded categories. Once someone is labeled schizophrenic, every action is filtered through the diagnosis. Silence becomes withdrawal, curiosity becomes paranoia, calm becomes flat affect. The diagnosis does not simply describe behavior, it reinterprets it. And that's powerful. Because institutions carry authority, and authority shapes perception. Here's what we know. Systems are built on classification. Classification requires boundaries. When boundaries blur, the system still must decide. And once it decides, it commits. The Rosenhan experiment suggests that psychiatric environments at the time struggle to separate behavior from expectation. Now, this doesn't mean mental illness isn't real. It doesn't mean psychiatry is fraudulent. It means diagnostic systems can be vulnerable to confirmation bias. When an institution expects illness, it often finds it. That principle extends beyond psychiatry. Labels influence interpretation. Authority influences outcome. And once a person is placed inside a system, it becomes difficult to step outside the narrative assigned to them. There's an irony here. The only people who reportedly questioned the pseudo-patient's sanity were actual patients, not staff, not doctors. those details matter because it reminds us expertise is powerful, but it's certainly not infallible. Institutions are necessary, but they're not immune to error. And once a label is attached, it can reshape how every behavior is perceived. So, what does that tell us? It tells us that interpretation is not neutral. It is influenced by environment, expectation, and authority structure. Which brings us back to the larger theme tonight. Systems interpret reality for us, sometimes accurately, sometimes imperfectly. The Rosenhan experiment forces a difficult question. Where else might interpretation in our reality become distorted? That doesn't require paranoia, it requires awareness. Because skepticism, when disciplined, protects clarity. And that's what we know. And for our last segment, Machu Picchu, science versus legend. According to recent reporting on new archaeological surveys, LiDAR technology has revealed previously hidden structures surrounding Machu Picchu. LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, uses lasers, pulses fired from aircraft or drones to measure the shape of the ground below. Those pulses can penetrate dense vegetation. They allow researchers to map terrain and structures that would otherwise remain concealed beneath jungle growth. In 2024 and 2025, new LiDAR scans identified multiple additional structures near the Incan citadel. Researchers believe these include expanded residential zones, water management systems, and possible ceremonial areas extending beyond what was traditionally mapped. In short, Machu Picchu appears to be more extensive than previously documented. Not mythical, not mystical, just larger and more complex. That's basically the article. Here's what makes this interesting. For decades, our understanding of ancient sites has depended largely on what the human eye could see: stone, elevation, surface patterns. But technology changes perception. When you introduce a tool that strips away the jungle digitally, you aren't changing history, you're changing visibility. And that distinction matters. Because sometimes mystery isn't about hidden forces, it's about hidden structure. LiDAR doesn't invent ruins, it reveals geometry. It exposes patterns that were always there, we just lack the lens to see them. And there's something fitting about that, isn't there? After talking about institutions and perception tonight, here we have a case where new tools correct old assumptions. No scandals, no manipulation, just refinement. The Incas were not building a singular monument on a mountaintop. They were building a functioning environment, a network, an ecosystem of stone and water and terrain. That complexity becomes clear with better instruments. And that's a reminder. Progress doesn't always debunk wonder. Sometimes it deepens it. The site becomes less mysterious in one sense, but more impressive in another. Because the more we see, the more deliberate it appears. And that's a signal I think worth noticing. Sometimes the unknown isn't dramatic, it's simply undiscovered. And that's what we know. That's what we're learning. That concludes tonight's broadcast. Links to all the articles used will be in the description below. And as always, if you've seen anything strange or unexplained, feel free to reach out in the comments or by email. Until next time, we'll keep listening for the signal.